I shouldn't have taken this job. If I had known the price was not just sleepless nights, but also my own sanity, I would rather wash dishes for hire or drive a rideshare motorbike. My name is Min, 23 years old, a final year architecture student. Like any other poor student, I needed money for tuition and to cover the 2 months of overdue rent. When I saw the recruitment flyer hastily pasted on a utility pole near school, night security guard wanted at District 9 History Museum. Salary, $15 million. Month plus allowance. Start immediately. I thought I hit the jackpot. $15 million for sitting around doing nothing and doing a few patrol rounds? A steal. The interview happened strangely fast. The old manager, Uncle Hung, a gaunt man with deep sunken dark circles under his eyes, didn't ask anything about my experience or health. He just stared at me, as if assessing whether I had enough guts, then thrust into my hand an old walkie-talkie and a crumpled yellowed piece of paper. "You're hired." His voice was hoarse, sounding like sandpaper rubbing together. "The shift starts from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. These are the rules. Read carefully. Remember carefully. Don't make mistakes." I picked up the paper. It was typed in an outdated courier font, the ink unevenly dark and faded. There were 5 rules, but rule number 3 was bolded in red pen, the ink indented deep into the paper. Check the camera system every 30 minutes. Lock the door to artifact storage number 4 tight before midnight. Absolutely do not turn your back to the war exhibit after 2 a.m. If you must pass, walk backwards. If you hear a child crying in the ceramics section, turn on symphonic music on the PA system. Don't go check. Never look into the mirror in the second floor restroom for more than 5 seconds. At that time, I laughed. What kind of rules sound like online ghost stories, Uncle? Are you trying to scare the new guy? Uncle Hung didn't laugh. He grabbed my wrist tightly, his hand ice cold and damp with sweat. "You think I'm joking? The guy before you laughed just like that. Now he is lying in the Bien Hua mental asylum." Saying that, he hurriedly gathered his things and left quickly, as if afraid of being held back by something, leaving me alone in the vast, deep grand hall. It is now 10:45 p.m. I am sitting in the duty room, surrounded by grainy camera screens. The atmosphere in the museum had a very strange smell, a mixture of anti-termite chemical smell, the smell of old fabric dust, and the nauseatingly strong smell of candle wax. I looked up at screen number 4, which displayed the war exhibit. The wax statues, simulating ancient soldiers, stood motionless in the dim light of the emergency lamp. They held spears, pikes, their faces sculpted with expressions of eternal anger. Something was wrong. I narrowed my eyes to look closer at the screen. The soldier statue in the left corner. I remember earlier, it was holding the spear with its right hand. Why is it holding it with the left hand now? A chill ran down my spine. I probably just remembered it wrong. How can wax statues change hands? I reassured myself, taking a sip of bitter black coffee to chase away the feeling of unease creeping in my stomach. The first 2 nights passed suspiciously quietly. No strange noises, no ghosts, and the cameras worked normally. I started to laugh at myself for being so faint-hearted over Uncle Hung's threats. He probably just wanted to scare me, so I would quit early. Or simply, he had been obsessed with the loneliness in this vast museum for too long. But that peace ended on the 3rd night. The clock struck 11:45 p.m. It was time for the scheduled patrol. I grabbed the flashlight, clipped the walkie-talkie to my shoulder, and stepped out of the warm duty room, to plunge into the coldness of the museum corridor. My duty was to check the folk culture area on the first floor first. This area always gave me the creeps the most. It displayed models recreating 19th century Vietnamese village life, with straw scarecrows and, worst of all, life-sized wax figures wearing period costumes. I stopped in front of the glass display case themed Old Town Wedding. Inside were 2 wax figures, a groom wearing a traditional tunic and turban, and a bride wearing a multi-layered dark red traditional dress. My flashlight beam swept across the bride's pale face, painted with bright red lipstick. Her glass eyes stared blankly into the indefinite void. Wait. I froze, shining the light straight at the bride statue's face. My heart skipped a beat. I remembered very clearly, I swear to heaven and earth, that yesterday, both statues were looking straight ahead, towards the aisle where visitors stand. I even remembered criticizing the sculptor for making their eyes too soulless when looking head-on. But now, the bride statue's head was tilting to the left. Not much. Just about 5 degrees. but enough that its gaze was no longer the aisle, but was the shoulder of the groom statue next to it. "Must be Miss Land, the janitor," I muttered, my voice echoing forlornly in the quiet space. "This morning, she cleaned the glass, probably bumped into it, and shifted the statue." I tried to cling to that logical thought. Right, just a physical collision. I sighed with relief, deciding to do something that I would later know was a mistake. I opened the glass door of the display case to adjust the statue's head. The smell of old wax and moldy fabric rushed straight into my nose, much stronger than when standing outside. My trembling hand touched the statue's cheek, ice cold and slippery. I used both hands to gently rotate the wax head back to its old position. It moved with difficulty, making a tiny, screeching sound due to the rusted metal joints inside. Done. The bride was looking straight again. I closed the glass door, locked the latch, and turned my back to continue walking. But after taking about 3 steps, a stream of cold air ran down my spine, making me shiver. It wasn't the cold of the air conditioner, it was the feeling of being watched. A crazy thought popped into my head. If the neck joint was that stiff and rusty, if you devire, will mega vi, then how could Miss Land, the janitor, just accidentally bump into it and make it shift? How strong must the collision force be? I didn't dare turn my head back to check that display case. I walked faster towards the stairs, trying to ignore the sound of my own footsteps. Echoing back, sounding like someone was walking backwards right behind me. 1:15 a.m. I had returned to the safety of the duty room, locked the door, and slumped into the chair. My breathing was still uneven after the patrol trip just now, although reason kept screaming that it was just paranoia caused by sleep deprivation. But the cold feeling at my fingertips when touching that wax statue's cheek still haunted me. The duty room was about 10 square meters wide, piled with old CRT monitor screens, emitting a low hum of electric current. This was the only place in the museum with bright fluorescent lighting, my fortress amidst the vast sea of darkness outside. But that safety was more fragile than I thought. Above the control panel was an audio monitoring speaker system. This is archaic technology from the 92nds, allowing guards to hear sounds from different exhibit areas, to detect thieves smashing glass or prying doors. Normally, I always turn the volume down to the lowest level because it only emits the crackling sound of static noise. Suddenly, from the speaker corresponding to Channel 2, Litran Dynasty Ceramics area, a strange sound rang out, tearing through the silence of the room. Zzz. Zzz. I flinched, almost spilling my coffee. I hurriedly leaned forward, turning the volume knob higher. Not static noise. Definitely not. Screech. Screech. That was the sound of something very heavy, with a hard and rough surface, being dragged on the granite floor. It wasn't continuous, but intermittent, with a slow, heavy rhythm. I closed my eyes, trying to visualize. That sound sounded like the bottom of a giant ceramic vase rubbing against the floor. Or worse, the sound of rotting wood of a coffin being pushed. Cold sweat started beating on my forehead. The ceramics area is right next to the war area. Displayed there are ancient vases, dishes, and terracotta guardian statues up to 2 meters tall. I glued my eyes to screen number 2. The blurry black and white image showed rows of silent glass cabinets. There was no one there, no human figure, no rats, nothing moving. But the sound from the speaker continued to torture my nerves. Screech. Silence. 3 seconds. Screech. It is moving. Whatever it is moving out of the camera's angle of view. I held my breath, listening very carefully. That sound was changing. The heavy dragging sound gradually became lighter, and intermingled with it was another sound. Clop, clack, clop, clack. Footsteps, but not the rubber soles of a guard, nor the canvas shoes of a visitor. It sounded sharp, neat, and rigid, like someone walking on wooden clogs, or on feet made of rigid terracotta. Then suddenly, all sound ceased. The speaker went silent. Only the hiss of static remained. That sudden silence was even more terrifying than the noise just now. It's like when you are walking in the forest and suddenly the birds and insects stop. A sign that a predator is very close. I stared at the screen, swallowing. My throat was dry and bitter. I wondered if that thing had stopped, or if it had discovered I was eavesdropping and was finding its way here. I shifted my attention away from screen number 2, eyes darting continuously across the remaining 11 screens like a madman. My whole body tensed up, waiting for a movement, a shadow, or anything to break this deadly silence. Screen number 4, War Exhibit. This is the area I hate the most, and also the place with that bizarre rule number 3. Never turn your back. The screen for this area always has heavier interference than other areas. Horizontal stripes kept running continuously from bottom to top, like endless rhythmic waves. But through that layer of grain, I saw something inexplicable. In the center of the frame was the Musketeers' display podium, a collection of wax statues simulating 17th century European royal guards, a gift from a French museum last year. There were a total of 3 statues standing in a triangle, hands holding pikes, heads wearing wide-brimmed feathered hats. Or at least, there should have been 3. I rubbed my eyes, pressing my face close to the dusty convex screen. The statue standing at the highest position, the commander, was no longer standing on the podium. It was standing on the floor. Its shadow cast long on the wooden floor, unusually pitch black and sharp compared to the quality of this lousy camera. Its posture was also no longer solemn and upright as when I passed by in the afternoon. It was crouching, knees slightly bent, back arched, and the pike in its hand was no longer upright, but lowered parallel to the ground, as if in a stance preparing to attack. "Impossible," I whispered, voice trembling. "You're seeing things, men. It's the cloak." And just the cloak slipping. I tried to find a logical reason. Maybe the podium broke? Maybe the mannequin fell over? But if it fell, it should be lying sprawled on the ground, not standing crouched perfectly like that. Suddenly, screen number 4 started twitching violently. The image was distorted, twisted to the sides. Ear-piercing shrieks, "Ee!" rang out from the speaker, making me cover my ears tightly. The entire screen turned stark white for about 3 seconds, blinding a corner of the dark room. When the image stabilized, my heart felt like it stopped. The commander statue had disappeared. The wooden podium was empty. The patch of floor where it had just been crouching was also empty. No signs of breakage, no debris. Only the 2 remaining soldier statues still stood there, motionless and emotionless. But wait. I held my breath, looking closely at the bottom right corner of the screen, where the camera couldn't cover everything because it was obscured by a large pillar. At the edge of the screen, I saw a small black streak moving very slowly out of the frame. That was the toe of a boot. It had walked out of the war zone. I sat dead silent in the chair, cold sweat pouring out, soaking the back of my shirt. The clock on the wall read 1:35 a.m. According to protocol, if an anomaly is detected on camera, I am forced to go for a visual check to confirm before reporting to the police or manager. It is a mandatory rule. If I raise a false alarm, I will be docked, pay, or fired. But if I go out there... I looked at the duty room door, which was closed tight. Out there is thick darkness, long deep corridors, and something made of wax and scrap fabric walking freely. I swallowed dryly, the taste of bitter bile rising in my throat. I had no other choice. I reached for the specialized flashlight and rubber baton. My hand trembled as I turned the doorknob. The latch clicked open with a dry clack, sounding like a gunshot exploding in the quiet night. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the fear churning in my stomach, then pushed the door open and stepped out. Immediately, the cold of the museum corridor hit me like a bucket of ice water. Not the cold of temperature, but the cold of death, of objects that have existed for centuries, accumulating so much resentment and dust of time. I turned on the flashlight. The blue-white beam cut across the dense darkness, shining on the wall, patches motley with mold stains. The corridor leading to the war exhibit was about 50 meters long, but tonight it seemed to stretch endlessly. The 2 walls were hung full of oil portraits of historical figures. During the day, they looked so dignified, but under my shaking flashlight beam right now, the eyes in the paintings seemed to be glancing, following my every step. Clop, clop, clop. My footsteps echoed on the tiled floor, bouncing back from the empty walls, creating overlapping sounds, making me unable to distinguish which was my footstep, which was another strange noise. The atmosphere here was thick, heavy as lead. I felt like I was wading through water rather than walking in air. And that smell, the smell of candle wax and rotting old fabric I smelled in the duty room, now it was strong to the point of suffocation. It mingled with the metallic tang of rust and the pungent smell of preservative chemicals. I walked past the folk costume exhibit. The clothes hanging on headless stands swayed slightly, even though there was no wind. Their shadows cast on the wall, dancing wildly whenever my trembling hand shifted the flashlight direction. For a moment, I swore I saw a shadow with a head, while the clothes rack had none. "Calm down, Min. You're just scaring yourself," I whispered through clenched teeth, my hand gripping the baton so tight that the knuckles turned white. The closer to the war zone, the more the temperature dropped distinctly. My breath started to puff out a hazy white mist. At the end of the corridor was the arched doorway leading to that area. The door stood wide open, dark as a giant mouth waiting to swallow prey. From inside there, not a single sound was emitted. Absolute silence. A waiting silence. I stopped at the threshold, heart pounding against my chest as if wanting to break ribs to jump out. Survival instinct screamed, telling me to turn and run immediately, but my feet felt buried tight into the floor. I raised the flashlight, directing the beam into that pitch-black darkness. Is anyone there? My voice was shattered, pathetically weak. Answering me was only the moan of wind drafting through a broken window crack somewhere. I swallowed dryly, stepping one foot inside. The floor under my feet changed from ceramic tile to old wooden flooring. Creak! A small sound rang out under my shoe heel. I had entered the tiger's den, and I knew I was no longer alone. My flashlight beam swept, glinting across the large room. The war exhibit was designed like a medieval dungeon, with faux stone walls and a low ceiling, hung full of ragged banners. The darkness here seemed to have weight, swallowing the flashlight beam after just a few meters. I held my breath, sweeping the light towards the central wooden podium, where the Musketeers statue group was displayed. My heart felt constricted, then burst out in a chaotic feeling between relief and extreme confusion. It was there. The commander statue, the one I swore I saw disappear on the camera screen, was now standing tall on the podium, right in the old spot. The two remaining soldiers still stood on both sides like loyal guards. "You're crazy, Min," I exhaled, a dry laugh coming from my throat sounding pathetically distorted. "Camera glitch. Your eyes were dazzled. How on earth can statues walk?" I lowered the flashlight, intending to turn around and walk out of this godforsaken room immediately. But then, the light accidentally grazed the upper body of the commander statue, and I froze. Something was wrong. I slowly raised the light, shining it straight at the statue's face. The pale wax face, the blue glass eyes, still stared blankly into the soulless void. But its hands. I remembered very clearly, in the tour guide document I skimmed through at the start of the shift, this statue was described in the salute posture, meaning the pike standing upright, the shaft touching the ground, right hand gripping the shaft at chest level. But now, its two hands were gripping the pike tightly, raised to hip level, and that sharp stainless steel pike tip was not pointing up at the sky. It was pointing straight forward, parallel to the floor. That sharp point aimed straight at the main aisle, at the neck level of an adult. If I walked past there in the dark without turning on the light, that pike would pierce straight through my throat. A cold shiver ran down my spine, making my goosebumps rise in waves. This wasn't a 5-degree head tilt or a change of grip. This was a complete change of posture, an attack stance. I swallowed saliva, my feet unconsciously taking a step back. But damned curiosity, or perhaps the stupidity of youth, urged me to do one more thing. I walked closer, pressing the flashlight close to the pike tip. On the shiny steel tip, there was a streak of something. It was dark, viscous. A drop of liquid was slowly gathering at the sharp tip, heavy and waiting to fall. I narrowed my eyes to look closely. Not rust. Also not weapon preservative oil. Plop. The liquid drop fell onto the wooden floor, making a tiny sound but echoing in my mind like a sledgehammer. I bent down, reaching my trembling finger to lightly swipe the small streak on the floor. It was sticky, ice cold. I brought my finger near my nose, sniffing lightly. Fishy smell. Strong smell of rusty iron. Blood, or something very like blood, but older, fouler. I jerked backward, almost falling to sit on the floor. I wiped my finger hastily on my pants, a feeling of nausea rising in my throat. When I looked up at the statue again, the flashlight beam wobbled across its face. in a brief split second as darkness danced on those soulless wax features. I swear I saw the corner of its mouth curl up. A stiff, twisted smile. I don't remember how I left that room. I only remember that survival instinct screamed at my face, a single command: back away, don't turn your back. I walked backwards, step by step, eyes not leaving the twisted smile on the wax face of the musketeer, until my back touched the cold wooden door frame. As soon as my heel touched the corridor, I turned my head and ran for my life. The sound of my shoes pounding on the tile floor, thud-thud echoed throughout the vast space, sounding like my heart beating in my chest. I rushed into the duty room, slammed the door, latched the safety lock, then dragged a chair to block the doorknob. I stood, leaning against the wall, sliding down to the ground, lungs burning like I just inhaled acid. Safe. The familiar fluorescent light, the purring sound of the air conditioner. The real world is here. But curiosity once again defeated fear. I have to know. I have to know if I am crazy or not. I crawled up, moving towards the control desk. My hand trembled so much, it took 3 tries to firmly grasp the computer mouse. I opened the camera management software, selecting the recording file of camera number 4, War Exhibit. Time displayed on file, 1:28 a.m. I fast-forwarded. Images flashed by. Statues standing still, dim light, static stripes running down the screen. 29 and 45 seconds. I switched to slow motion frame-by-frame mode. My eyes were glued to the 24-inch computer monitor. At the 58th second, the screen flashed violently. This is when the static interference incident happened. 1:30 and 2 seconds. a.m. The image cleared. The commander statue disappeared from the podium. That was what I saw directly. But this time, watching it back in the safety of the duty room, with high concentration, I saw something else. Something 1,000 times more terrible than a walking statue. I held my breath, zooming in on the top left corner of the screen, where a group of Tran Dynasty archer statues stood hiding behind a rampart model. At second, 1 hour 29 minutes and 58 seconds, their heads were facing towards the assumed enemy on the right. But at second, 1 hour 30 minutes and 3 seconds, right when the musketeers stepped onto the floor, the heads of all of them, 5 archers, 2 cavalrymen in the distance, and even the wooden horse, had all turned 90 degrees. They were not looking at the musketeer. They were not looking at each other. All of them, at the same time, at the same angle, were staring straight into the camera lens. They were looking at me. A chill ran from the top of my head to my heels. I rewound one more time to be sure. Click. Look away. Click. Look at cam. Their synchronization was precise, to the point of being mechanical. Not coincidence. Not due to shaking. It was a collective consciousness. They knew where the camera was. They knew I was sitting here, behind this screen, watching them. And their eyes. Even though they were just faint black spots on the low-resolution screen, I still felt the hostility radiating from those soulless eyes. Suddenly, a noise rang out right next to my ear, making me jump and fall backward in the chair. That was the internal desk phone ringing. Ring. 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 The ringing was shrill, ear-piercing in the quiet late night. I stared at the dusty black desk phone. Who calls at this hour? The manager or the police? I tremblingly lifted the receiver, pressing it to my ear. H. Hello? Security speaking. The other end had no human voice answering. Only the hiss of static electricity. And then, mixed in that hiss, I heard a voice. No, not exactly speaking. It was like the sound of 2 stones grinding together, trying to mimic human sound. You. Saw it. Didn't. You? I slammed the receiver onto the table, the force so strong that the phone bounced and fell to the ground, the coiled cord swinging in the air. A harsh clicking sound rang out, but it couldn't drown out the creepy sound of that voice in my head. You. Saw. It. I backed away, pressing my back against the farthest corner of the wall, eyes fixed on the entrance door. My breath was rapid, choking in my throat. I wanted to scream, wanted to run out, but reason told me that outside was hell. This room was the last fortress. The electronic clock on the wall flashed digits. 2:59 and 59 seconds. AM, 3 AM, foot. A small crackling explosion rang out. and then the whole world was plunged into darkness. The bright camera screen simultaneously went out. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling died. The soft purr of the air conditioner and computer hard drive died out. Silence arrived immediately. A heavy, thick silence, making my ears ring because the air pressure changed suddenly. In the dense darkness, there was only weak, sickly yellow light from a distant streetlight, casting through the small high window, painting long, ghostly streaks of light on the floor. Clack. A dry noise rang out from the entrance door. My heart felt like it fell out of my chest. That was the sound of the automatic magnetic lock clicking open. When power is lost, the museum security system is programmed to failsafe, to serve as an escape. The duty room door, the only thing separating me from the monsters outside, was now no longer locked. Only the chair I had blocked against the doorknob was the only remaining obstacle. I held my breath, covering my mouth tightly to prevent a sob of fear from escaping, and then I heard it. From the end of the long, deep corridor, in the quiet night, footsteps began to ring out. Clop, clop, clop. It wasn't fast, not in a hurry. It was steady, slow, and terribly heavy. Every footstep pounding on the granite floor created a dull, thudding echo, like the sound of a wooden hammer striking a drumhead. It didn't sound like human footsteps. Humans when walking have a glide, elasticity of the feet and shoe soles. But this sound, clop, rigid, clop, soulless, like two blocks of hard material colliding, footsteps getting closer and closer. Clop, clop. It passed through the staff locker area. Clop. It passed by the public water fountain. I heard the sound of the water bottle vibrating violently with every step. It is coming here. It knows exactly where I am. A foul stench began to crawl through the door crack on the floor. Smell of century-old moldy clothes, smell of tomb dust, and the pungent metallic smell of the liquid I touched earlier. The footsteps stopped, right in front of the duty room door. I stared wide-eyed at the crack under the bottom of the door. Under the dim light reflecting from the corridor window, I saw two long black shadows cast on the floor, blocking the light. A pair of old leather boots, the toes covered in dry mud and dark black streaks. I hurriedly pulled my mobile phone out of my pants pocket, my fingers sliding frantically on the sweat-soaked touchscreen. No service. The cold words appeared in the corner of the screen like a death sentence. In this meter-thick concrete bunker, the phone signal was already weak, now seemingly blocked completely by some invisible force. Clack, clack, clack. The metal doorknob began to turn. It turned left, then right, jerky and violent. Outside, that thing was trying to open the door. It knew I was in here. The chair I wedged into the doorknob began to slide on the floor, emitting a screeching sound. The chair legs frictioned against the tiled floor, leaving white scratches. It wouldn't last much longer. Boom! A powerful impact struck the door, making the entire room shake. Dust from the ceiling fell scattered onto my hair. It wasn't the sound of a hand or a human shoulder banging on the door. The sound was sharp and hard, like someone was using an oak log smashing straight into the metal surface. Boom, boom. The pounding became more and more rapid, frantic. The iron door began to warp. The chair blocking the door had been pushed back a distance. One chair leg had snapped. I backed up tight into the corner, hand clutching the useless rubber baton, the eyes not leaving the tiny rectangular tempered glass pane on the entrance door. And then, it appeared. A face slowly rose, pressing tight against the glass. It was the face of the musketeer. The pale wax skin, artificially smooth, was pressed flat against the glass surface. The artificial wax nose was squashed flat, twisted to one side. The mouth painted with red paint, still maintained a stiff, emotionless smile. But the eyes... I screamed. A scream choked in my throat. The eyes in those wax sockets were no longer soulless light blue glass. They were human eyes. Real eyes, with whites bloodshot with bright red veins and the jet black pupils twitching frantically. They were wet, vivid, and contained ultimate chaos. They rolled continuously, glancing left, glancing right, then spinning, as if the owner of those eyes was trapped in a cramped wax cage and screaming to escape. Suddenly, those eyes stopped. They looked straight at me, cowering in the corner. The pupils contracted tiny. Boom! The next hit was so strong that the tempered glass surface appeared, with a spiderweb crack right in the middle of the monster's forehead. Snap! The sound of splintering wood rang out dryly. One leg of the armchair snapped off, flying far away. The iron door burst open a narrow gap of about 10 centimeters. Immediately, a hand thrust through the opening. It was a pale wax hand, rigid, with long spindly fingers that had no joints. It fumbled in the air, trying to find the inner doorknob to open the latch. Hard plastic fingernails scratched against the metal door surface, creating a screeching, ear-piercing sound, like chalk screeching on a blackboard, making my skin crawl with goosebumps all over. I can't stay here. This room has become a deadly trap. I scrambled up, eyes darting frantically, looking for an exit. The main door was blocked. The window was too small and had solid iron bars. There was only one way left, the side door leading to the server room, and from there to the corridor behind the ancient exhibit. It was a longer detour to reach the emergency exit. And worst of all, I had to run across the 18 Arhats corridor, where 18 jackfruit wood statues were displayed, painted red and gold with a history of hundreds of years. Boom! Another ram made the door hinges creak and groan, about to snap off. That distorted wax head was trying to squeeze through the gap, the mouth still smiling its deadly smile, while the real human eyes wildly scanned looking for me. Damn it. Damn it. I hissed through my teeth, rushing toward the side door. My hand trembled as I put the key in the lock. The key slipped out, falling to the floor. No. Not allowed. I knelt down, fumbling in the dim darkness. Sweat dripped into my stinging eyes. Behind my back, the sound of metal being bent groaned, signaling the door was about to collapse completely. My fingers touched the ice-cold metal mass of the keyring. I grabbed it, thrusting it hard into the lock again. Click. The sound of the latch opening sounded like music from heaven. I turned the knob, lunged through the door, and slammed it shut, just as I heard a massive thud from the duty room. The iron door on the other side had collapsed. It had gotten in. I didn't dare look back, nor did I dare stop to lock the side door. I rushed into the darkness of the cramped server room, weaving through the hot server racks, then burst through the door and ran straight into the ancient exhibit corridor. The space here was much larger and colder. Weak moonlight cast through the skylight above, shining down on the wooden Arhat statues standing along both sides of the aisle. Normally, looking at these statues, they look very dignified and serene, but tonight, under the dim light and in extreme panic, they looked like lurking monsters. Rough wooden faces, bulging, huge eyes, long outstretched arms in bizarre poses. I ran headlong. The sound of my shoes echoed throughout the corridor, but then I heard it. Clop, clop, clop. Rigid footsteps chasing from behind. It was faster than before. It was running, and more terribly, when I ran past the sitting deer Arhat statue, Arhat riding a deer, I heard another sound ring out right next to me. C-R-R-E-A-A-K. The sound of wood twisting. I glanced sideways while still running for my life. The head of the wooden deer at the statue's feet. It just turned to look at me. The footsteps behind were no longer single clop. Clop. Rhythms. Now it sounded like a hailstorm pouring down on the floor. Not just the musketeer. I heard the clacking of wood colliding, shoe soles dragging, and the rustling of fabric rubbing against each other from both rows of Arhat statues. This entire corridor was coming alive. Don't look back. Run. Run. I screamed in my head, legs pedaling at full speed towards the emergency exit door, glowing faintly green at the end of the road. The only lighthouse in this nightmare. But suddenly, a freezing blast of wind slapped hard against my neck. A rigid, rough hand brushed past my shoulder, sharp nails tearing a long line on the uniform fabric. I screamed, and with the natural reflex of a cornered beast, I whipped around, swinging the flashlight behind me like a weapon. The white beam sliced through the darkness, and immediately, all sound ceased. The sight before my eyes made my heart stop for a second. The musketeer was standing right behind me, less than half a meter away. It was in a lunging posture, one leg lifted high in the air, both hands outstretched as if wanting to strangle me. The distorted wax face with bulging, bloodshot real human eyes, staring straight at my face with frantic hunger. But it was completely motionless, as if someone had just pressed pause on the remote control. I panted heavily, hands trembling as I kept the flashlight pointed straight at its face. They stop when there is light, or when being seen. I stepped back one step. It remained still. I took another step back, but my foot tripped over a shoelace. The flashlight beam wobbled, slipping off the musketeer for a split second. Clop! The moment darkness enveloped it, it immediately moved. A violent footstep stomped on the floor, narrowing the gap. I hurriedly shone the light back. It froze again. The posture had changed. Now its wax hands were only a few centimeters away from my throat. I understand now. This is the only survival rule. You won't catch me, I hissed, tears mixed with sweat flowing down my face. I began moving backward towards the emergency exit, hands still holding the flashlight tightly aimed at the monster. But I forgot one thing. I am in the 18 Arhats corridor. When I walked backward past the dragon-taming Arhat statue, my flashlight focused on the musketeer in front, so my flanks were submerged in darkness. Whoosh! A pitch-black ebony wooden arm whipped out hard from the right. I only had time to lean and dodge. The wooden hand slammed hard into the brick wall, shattering a patch of plaster, dust flying. I frantically swung the flashlight to the right. The dragon-taming Arhat froze, arm still outstretched in midair, the rough wooden face with carved teeth bared in a bizarre grin. But as soon as I shone the light to the right, the musketeer in the center rushed again. Clap! Clap! I shone the light back to the center. It stopped. I was surrounded. I couldn't illuminate all of them at the same time. The emergency exit door was only about 10 meters away, and 10 meters of life and death. I took a deep breath, thumb placed on the flashlight button. I started flashing the light continuously, sweeping back and forth like a mad lighthouse beacon. On, off, sweep left, off, sweep right, on. Each time the light went off, footsteps rang out rapidly. Each time the light went on, they fossilized in postures, getting closer and closer, more twisted. Those were the most horrific stop-motion films in the world. The musketeer was already right in front. The Arhat statues had stepped down from their pedestals, surrounding me like a pack of hungry wolves. 5 meters. My hands were numb. 3 meters. I felt the cold emanating from the wax body of the soldier. I turned my back, threw away all rules, lunged, crashing into the emergency exit push bar. Click. The door burst open. Night wind rushed in, bringing the smell of plants and distant vehicle sounds of the real world. I tumbled out onto the steps, rolling several times on the rough concrete ground. Just before the spring door automatically closed, I managed to turn my head for one last look. All of them, musketeer, wooden statues, terracotta statues, had crowded right at the threshold. Dozens of faces crowded together in the narrow doorway, staring at me fixedly under the dim moonlight. And all of them were waving goodbye. I don't remember how far I ran, only knowing that I didn't stop until I saw the dazzling headlights of a truck running on the highway and heard the loud air horn. I collapsed onto the grass by the roadside, vomiting uncontrollably until there was nothing left in my stomach but sour gastric juice. I never went back there. The very next morning, I sent a brief message to manager Uncle Hung. I quit. Don't look for me. After that, I threw that phone SIM down the drain, blocked all strange numbers, calling my main number, and even moved my boarding house to another district, 20 kilometers away. I accepted losing half a month's salary and the old house deposit, as long as I never had to breathe in that horrific smell of candle wax and mold again. My life gradually returned to normal, or at least I tried to act like that, but I couldn't sleep without turning on the lights, and I never dared to enter any clothing store that had mannequins anymore. Every time I saw those soulless plastic faces, I felt a chill down my spine, waiting for them to turn their heads to look at me. 3 months have passed since that horrific night. This morning, while surfing the web looking for a new part-time job, a news snippet on an e-newspaper locally hit my eyes, making the blood in my body freeze. Mysterious disappearance at the History Museum. Authorities are searching for Mr. Tran Van T, 25 years old, a night security guard at the History Museum, who disappeared without a trace in the early morning of yesterday. At the scene, police only found the victim's security uniform torn to pieces, lying scattered at the foot of the display podium in the war area. I dropped the phone onto the table, hands trembling violently. Below the article was a scene photo recorded by a reporter. Although the photo was a bit blurry, I recognized that familiar display podium immediately. The musketeer statue still stood tall, holding the pike pointing at the sky in the correct standard posture. But when I zoomed in closely on the statue's face, I almost screamed. That wax face was no longer pale. It seemed a bit more rosy. The mouth still smiled, that stiff smile. But the eyes, the old light blue glass eyes had disappeared. In their place was a pair of dark brown eyes. A very familiar pair of eyes. They looked straight into the camera lens, containing extreme panic, being permanently imprisoned. I suddenly remembered the frantic eyes I had seen that night. The eyes with bloodshot red veins. Now I understand. Those statues, they are not just wax and wood. They are cages. And every time a new guard comes, their collection gets a new pair of eyes to look at the world. I write these lines not to tell a story for entertainment. I write to warn. If you are looking for a part-time job and see a recruitment post, night security guard at the History Museum with an unusually high salary, please, ignore it. Don't sell your soul to the devil for money. And if, just if, you happen to walk past a wax statue and feel like it is following you, don't turn back, run away, stop.